Hello, this is Anjali Pyburn, and I'm going to be presenting on Chapter 17 of our Disability Studies reader book, and that chapter is about reassigning meaning. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is this outline that I've provided, which just kind of helps to break down the key parts of all the subsections of the chapter that I found. And it just starts off with this quotation: linguistic conventions that structure the meanings assigned to disability and the patterns of response to disability that emanate from or are attended upon those meanings. This just kind of describes all of those words and all of these terms that we're going to be talking about and reading about in this chapter, that and how they are just trying to tell us something about what they mean, and the meaning that the disability community is trying to gather from that, and how society is just trying to label things and create meaning as well. So all of these things come into play and interact with each other, and it creates something that's a little bit confusing, and that's why I chose this chapter. In our earlier studies, I was having so many difficulties with all of these labels and what label is appropriate, and so I just thought it was very interesting to look into this chapter. So this chapter starts off talking about naming oppression, and this is just basically talking about the language that we have that just pushes the dominant culture's view of disability, and not necessarily what the experience of disability is. And this can be present, is compared with racism and sexism, and so we have some new terms, which is instead of, for example, a racist or a sexist, it's an ableist or ableism. So these terms are interesting and something good to look at. The next section is naming the group, and in here it just looks at talking about who people with disabilities are and why they're separated from the rest of society. So this is also a important thing to know, is who are we talking about and who determines who they are. The next section is nice words, and these are all of those politically correct words that we try to use to not be offensive, but we have to be careful with these words. And then there's also nasty words, which these are the ones that just paint a very negative view on disability. And it's been interesting to see what the disability community has been doing with those words. The next section is speaking about overcoming and passing, and overcoming as in overcoming a disability, and passing as in passing for normal when one has a disability, or able when one has a disability and is disabled. The next section is about normal versus abnormal, and these two terms, and just how they've been taken, and how they really create a strong foundation for who we are as healthcare professionals. And it really, in this section, is where you can ask a lot of questions about this word normal and what that means, and what it's saying about anyone who falls outside of that category of normal. The next section is passivity versus control. And this is really important to look at, just because of the type of language that we use as occupational therapists when we refer to people and diagnoses and disabilities. It just gives you a chance to look a little deeper into what the language that you're using. And then there's the multiple meanings, which just talks about the English language, and how we're using these words which actually have multiple meanings, and both of the meanings are conveying a certain message. They're basically assigning meaning to these labels. And finally, this chapter talks about the dis in disability, um, the prefix, and what that is saying about what it means to have a disability, and just again the power of language that's so apparent here. So there's the outline. It just kind of helps you to go through as you read to see some of the key points. And now I'm going to go into a presentation for you for this section. So again, reassigning meaning. The disability community has attempted to wrest control of the language from the previous owners and reassign meaning to the terminology used to describe disability and disabled people. Basically, the disability community is trying to take control again and take the right to label themselves, to say who they are and what their experience really means. So one of the articles that I looked into talked about early intervention and the power of language that happens in there, the terms that are used, and this quotation I found very powerful from my mother, and she just talks about what picture is painted with using this language, which we might not see any problem with. So it says the IE definition of arena, it is where professionals sit in a circle with the child in the middle, and the child is doing a task, and the people are jotting notes, and at the end they tell the parent everything that's wrong with their child, and so it really brings up a negative image. And the author goes on to talk about arena and how, this is a place of kind of like a spectacle, and what place that was back when you look at places like the Colosseum and these type of arenas, and it's not the most welcoming or calming or inviting of settings. So it's very interesting how a simple term like arena can paint such a picture. The problem with naming oppression is that it's really not understood very well. There's so much that the outside community does not understand about the experience of being disabled, and so sometimes it's hard to identify all of these things because those who are able-bodied, I'll say, they don't understand the experience, and they don't understand the impact that language has, language that we use every day, and they don't understand the obstacles and just the reaction. And so I chose this picture here because for me it kind of just shows something so simple like stairs that we might go up and down every day and think that there's no problem with it, yet we can't really understand, or it's such a second thought to think that, well, what if I couldn't use these stairs like everyone else? And what if my experience was different than it is? Would I use the same language? Would I use the same words when referring to a person or their situation? So it gets a little tricky there. This next slide, I invite you to watch this video. Very interesting for me. I like this video. So just take a moment here to stop and watch, and I'll just give you a moment to pause, and then you can push play again. Okay, so hopefully you've watched that and push pause and play again, and we'll move on for the next part. But I hope that helped you to understand the power of labels and labeling, and yeah, I really enjoyed that video.